Chapter 11. It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appeared confused and indistinct. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time. It was, indeed, a long time before I learned to distinguish between the operations of my various senses. By degrees, I remembered a stronger light pressed upon my nerves, so that I was obligated to shut my eyes. Darkness then came over me, and troubled me, but hardly I felt this when, by opening my eyes, I was now supposed the light poured in upon me again. I walked, and I believe descended, but I personally found a great alteration in my sensations. Before, dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me, impervious to my touch or sight, but now I found that I could wander on liberty, with no obstacles which I could not either surmount or avoid. The light became more and more oppressive to me, and the heat wearing me as I walked. I sought a place where I could receive shade. This was the forest near Iglis, and there I lay on the side of a brook, resting from my fatigue, until I felt tormented by hunger and thirst. This roused me from my nearly dormant state, and I ate some berries which I found hanging on trees or lying on the ground. I slaked my thirst at the brook, and lied down to overcome my sleep. It was dark when I woke. I felt cold also, and half frightened, as it were, instinctively, finding myself so desolate. Before I had quitted your apartment, a sensation of cold, I covered myself with some clothes, but these were insufficient to secure me from the dews of night. I was poor, helpless, miserable wretch. I knew and could distinguish nothing, but feeling pain invade me on all sides. I sat down and wept. Soon a gentle light stole over the heavens, and gave me a sensation of pleasure. I stared up and beheld the radiant form rise from among the trees. I gazed with kind of wonder. It moved slowly, but it lightened my path, and I again went out in search of berries. I was still cold when under one tree I found a huge cloak, with which I covered myself, and sat down upon the ground. No distinct ideas occupied my mind. All was confused. I felt light and hunger, and thirst and darkness. Innumerable sounds rang in my ears, and on all sides various scents saluted me. The only object I could distinguish was the bright moon, and I fixed my eyes on it with pleasure. Several changes of the day and night passed, and the orb of night had greatly lessened. When I began to distinguish my sensations from each other, I gradually saw plainly the clear stream that supplied me with drink, and the trees that shaded me with their foliage. I was delighted when I first discovered that a pleasant sound which often saluted my ears proceeded from the throats of little winged animals, who had often intercepted the light from my eyes. I began to observe, with greater accuracy, the forms that surrounded me, and to perceive boundaries of radiant roof and light that canopied me. Sometimes I tried to imitate the pleasant songs of birds, but were unable. Sometimes I wished to express my sensations in my own mood, but the uncouth and inarticulate sounds which broke me from frightened me into silence again. The moon had disappeared from the night, and again, with lessened form, showed itself while I still remained in the forest. My sensations had by this time become distinct, and my mind received every day additional ideas. My eyes became accustomed to the light and to perceive objects in their right forms, and distinguish insects from the herb, and by degrees one herb from another. I found the sparrow uttered none but harsh notes, whilst those of blackbird and thrush were sweet and enticing. One day, when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire, which had been left by wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew out and began to cry in pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects. I examined the materials of the fire, and to my joy I found it was composed of wood. I quickly collected some branches, but they were wet and would not burn. I was pained at this, and sat watching the operation of the fire. The wet wood, which I had placed near the heat, dried, and itself became inflamed. I reflected on this, and by touching various branches I discovered the cause, and busied myself in collecting a great quantity of wood, that I might dry it and have a plentiful supply of fire. When the night came on, and brought sleep with it, I was in the greatest fear lest my fire should be extinguished. I covered it carefully with dry wood and leaves and placed my burnt branches upon it, and then, spreading my cloak, I lay on the ground and sank into sleep. It was morning when I awoke. My first care was to visit the fire. I covered it, and a gentle breeze quickly fanned it into a flame. I observed this also contrived a fan of branches, which roused the embers, when they were nearly extinguished. When night came again, I found, with pleasure, that fire gave light as well as heat, that the discovery of this element was useful to me in my food. For I found some offals that travelers had left had been roasted, and tasted much more savory than the berries I had gathered from the trees. I tried, therefore, to dress my food in the same manner, placing it on live embers. I found the berries were spoiled by this operation, and the nuts and roots much improved. Food, however, became scarce, and I often spent the whole day searching in vain for a few acorns, assuage the pains of hunger. When I found this, I resolved to quit the place I had hitherto inhabited, to seek one where a few wants I experienced would be more satisfied. In this immigration, I exceedingly lamented the loss of fire, which I had obtained through accident, and knew not how to reproduce it. I gave few hours of serious consideration of this difficulty, but I was obligated to relinquish all attempts to supply it. Wrapping myself in my cloak, I struck across the woods towards setting of the sun. I passed 3 days in these rambles, and at length discovered open country. A great fall of snow had taken place on the night before, and the fields were of one uniform white. The appearance was discolorant, and I found my feet chilled by the cold, damp substance that covered the ground. It was about 7 in the morning when I longed to obtain food and shelter. At length I perceived a small hut on the rising ground, which had doubtless been built for the convenience of some shepherd. This was a new sight to me. I examined the structure with great curiosity. Finding the door open, I entered. An old man sat in it near a fire, which he was prepared for breakfast. He turned on hearing the noise and perceived me, shrieked loudly, quitting the hut, ran across the fields with a speed which was debited from hardly appearance capable. His appearance, different from any I had ever seen before, and his flight, somewhat surprised me. I was enchanted by the appearance of the hut. Here the rain and snow could not penetrate. The ground was dry, and it presented to me an exquisite and divine treat as pandemonium, appearance to the demons of hell. After the sufferings of the lake of fire, I greedily devoured the remains of the shepherd's breakfast, which consisted of bread, cheese, milk, and wine. The latter, however, I did not like. And overcame my fatigue, I lay down among the straw and fell asleep. It was noon when I awoke, lured by the warmth of the sun, which shone brightly on the white ground. I determined to recommence my travels, and depositing the remains of the peasant's breakfast in the wallet I found, I proceeded across the fields for several hours until at sunset I arrived at a village. How miraculous did this appear! The huts, the neater cottages, and the suitable houses engaged my admiration. By turns, the vegetables and gardens, the milk and cheese that I saw placed in the windows of some of the cottages allured my appetite. One of the best of these I entered. I had hardly placed a foot within the door before the children shrieked, and one of the women fainted. The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me, until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to open country, fearfully took refuge in a low hovel, quite buried, making a wretched appearance after palaces I had beheld in the village. This hovel, however, joined a cottage of neat and pleasant appearance, but after my late dearly bought experience, I dared not to enter it. My place of refuge was constructed of wood, but so low that I could with difficulty sit upright in it. No wood, however, was placed on the earth which formed the floor, but it was dry, and although the wind entered in by the innumerable chinks I had found in the agreeable asylum from the snow and rain, here and there I retreated and lay down, happy to have found shelter, however miserable, from the inclemency of season, and still more than the barbarity of man. As soon as morning dawned, I crept from my kennel, that I might view the adjacent cottage, and discover if I would remain in the habitation I had found. It was situated against the back of the cottage, surrounded on the sides were exposed by a pigsty and a clear pool of water. One part was open, and by which I crept in, but now I covered every crevice which I might receive with stones and wood, yet in a manner that I might move them on occasion to pass out. All the light I enjoyed came through the sky, and that was sufficient for me. Having thus arranged my dwelling, and covered it with clean straw, I retired, for I saw the figure of a man at a distance. I remembered too well my treatment the night before to thrust myself in his power. I had first, however, provided for my sustenance for that day by a loaf of coarse bread, which I purloined, and a cup which I had good drink. More conveniently than from my hand of pure water, which flowed by my retreat. The floor was a little raised, so that it was kept perfectly dry, and by its vicinity to the chimney of the cottage was tolerably warm. Being thus provided, I resolved to reside in this hovel until something should occur might alter my determination. It was indeed a paradise compared to the bleak forest, my former residence, and the rain-dropping branches and dank earth. I ate my breakfast with pleasure, and was about to remove my plank to procure myself a little water, when I heard a step. Looking through a small chink, I beheld a young creature, with a pail on her head, passing before my hovel. The girl was young, of gentle demeanor, unlike that since I found at the cottages, the farmhouse servant to me. Yet she was meanly dressed in a coarse blue petticoat, and a linen jacket being her only garb. Her fair hair was plaited out but not adorned. She looked patient yet sad. I lost sight of her, and in about a quarter of an hour she returned bearing a pail, which was now partly filled with milk. As she walked along, seemingly incommoded by the burden, a young man met her, whose countenance expressed a deeper dependence. Uttering a few sounds with an air melancholy, he lifted the pail from her head and bore it to the cottage himself. She followed, and they disappeared. Presently I saw the young man again, with some tools in his hand, cross of heel behind the cottage, and the girl was also posted in something by the house and sometimes in the yard. On examining my dwelling, I found that one of the windows of the cottage had formerly occupied part of it, but the panes had been filled up with wood. In one of these was a small but almost imperceptible chink through which the eye could penetrate. Through this crevice a small room was visible, whitewashed and clean, but very bare of furniture. In one corner, near a small fire, sat an old man. A young girl was occupied in arranging the cottage, but presently she took something out of a drawer, which employed her hands, and she sat down beside the old man, who, taking up the instrument, began to play, and to produce sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush or the nightingale. It was a lovely sight, even to me, poor wretch who had never beheld aught beautiful before. The silver hair and benevolent countenance of the aged cottager won my reverence, while the gentle manners of the girl excited my love. She played a sweet, mournful air, which I perceived draw tears from my eyes. Of this animal complexion, of which old man took no notice, until she sobbed audibly. Then he pronounced a few words, and the fair creature, leaving her work, knelt at his feet. He raised her and smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt my sensations of a particular and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or unable to bear these emotions. Soon after this, the young man returned, bearing on his shoulders a load of wood. The girl met him at the door, helped to relieve him of his burden, taking some of the fuel into the cottage and placed it on the fire. Then she and the youth went apart to the nook of the cottage, and she stowed her large loaf and piece of cheese. She seemed pleased and went into the garden for some roots and plants, which she placed in water and then upon the fire. She afterwards continued her work, whilst the young man went into the garden, appeared busily employed in the digging and pulling up roots. He had been employed thus about the hour. The young woman joined him, and they entered the cottage together. The old man, in the meantime, been pensive, but the appearance of his companions he soon more cheerful air, and they sat down to eat. The meal was quickly dispatched. The young woman was again occupied in arranging the cottage. The old man walked before the cottage in the sun for a few minutes, leaning on the arm of the youth. Nothing would exceed in beauty and contrast between these two excellent creatures. One was old, with silver hairs, and a countenance beaming, grateful in his figure, and his features were molded with finest symmetry. Yet his eyes, attitude, expressed the uttermost sadness and dismay. The odd man returned to the cottage, and the youth, tools different from those he had used in the morning, directed his steps across the fields. Night quickly shut in, but to my extreme wonder I found these cottages had means of prolonging light by use of tapers. I was delighted to find the setting sun did not put an end to the pleasure I had experienced in watching my human neighbors. In the evening, the young girl and her companion were employed in various occupations, which I did not understand. The old man again took up his instrument, and produced divine sounds that enchanted me in the morning. Soon, as he was finished, the youth began not to play, but to utter sounds that were monotonous, and neither resembled the harmony of the old man's instrument, nor the songs of birds. I since found that he read aloud, but at the time I knew nothing of the science or words of letter. The family, having been thus occupied for a short time, extinguished their lights and retired, as I conjectured, to rest. Chapter 12. I lay on my straw, but I could not sleep. I thought of the occurrences of the day. That chiefly struck me the gentle manners of these people. I longed to join them, but dared not. I remembered too well the treatment that I had suffered the night before from the barbarous villagers, and resolved, whatever course and conduct I might hereafter think it right to pursue, for at the present I would remain quietly in my hovel, watching in the doorway to discover the motives which influenced their actions. The cottagers arose the next morning before the sun. The young woman arranged the cottage and prepared the food. The youth departed after the first meal. This day was passed in the same routine that which preceded it. The young man was constantly employed outdoors, the young girl in various labors and occupations within. The old man, who I soon perceived to be blind, employed his leisure hours on his instrument or contemplation. Nothing could exceed the love and the respect which young cottagers exhibited towards their formidable companion. They performed towards him very little office of affection, a duty of gentleness, and renewed them by his benevolent smiles. They were not entirely happy. The young man, his companion, often went apart and appeared to weep. I saw no cause for their unhappiness, but I was deeply affected by it. If such lovely creatures were miserable, it was less strange that I, an imperfect and solitary being, should be wretched. Why were these gentle beings unhappy? They possessed a delightful house, for such was in my eyes even luxury. They had a fire to warm them when chill, and delicious viands when hungry. They were dressed in excellent clothes, and still more they enjoyed one another's company and speech, interchanging each day looks of affection and kindness. What did their tears imply? Did they reply express pain? I was at first unable to solve these questions, but perpetual attention and time explained to me many appearances which are first enigmatic. A considerable period elapsed before I discovered one of the causes of the uneasiness among the family. It was poverty. They had suffered that evil in very distressing degree. Their nourishment consisted entirely of vegetables of the garden and milk of one cow, which gave very little during the winter, when its masters could scarcely procure food to support it. They often, I believe, suffered the pangs of hunger very poignantly, especially the two younger cottagers, for several times they placed food before the old man, when they reserved none for themselves. This trait of kindness moved me sensibly. I had been accustomed during the night to steal a part of their store for my own consumption, but when I found that in doing this I inflicted pain on the cottagers, I abstained and satisfied myself with berries, nuts, and roots which I gathered from the neighboring wood. I discovered also other means which I was unable to assist their errors. I found the youth spent great part of each day in collecting wood for the family fire, and during the night I often took his tools and use, from which I quickly discovered it brought home fire sufficient for the consumption of several days. I remember the first time when I did this. The young woman, when she opened the door in the morning, appeared greatly astonished at seeing a great pile of wood on the outside. She uttered words out loud in a voice, and the youth joined her, who also expressed surprise. I observed, with pleasure, that he did not go to the forest that day, but spent it repairing the cottage and cultivating the garden. By degree, I made a discovery of still greater moment. I found that these people possessed a method of communicating their experiences and feelings to no other articulate sounds. I perceived that the words they spoke sometimes predicted pleasure or pain, smiles or sadness. In minds of countenances of the hearts, this is even godlike science, and I ardently desired to become acquainted with it. But I was baffled in every attempt I made for this purpose. Their pronunciation was quick, and their words uttered, not having any apparent connection with visible objects. I was unable to discover any clue by which I could unravel the mystery of their reference. By great application, however, and after having remained during the space of several revolutions of the moon in my hovel, I discovered the names that were given to some of the most familiar objects of discourse. I learned the implied words fire, milk, bread, and wood. I learned also the names of the cottagers themselves. The youth and his companion, which was father. The girl was called sister or Agatha. The youth, Felix, brother or son. I cannot describe the delight I felt when I learned the ideas appropriated to them. Each of these sounds was able to pronounce them. I distinguished several yet other words without being able to yet understand or apply them, such as good, dearest, unhappy. I spent the winter in this manner. The gentle manners and the beauty of the cottages greatly endeared them to me. When they were unhappy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathized in their joys. I saw few human beings besides them, and if other happened to enter the cottage with harsh manners and rude gait, only enhanced me the superior accomplishments of my friends. The old man, I perceived, often endeavored to encourage his children, as sometimes I found that he called them, to cast off their melancholy. He, when talking, cheerful assent, with the expression of goodness that bestowed pleasure upon even me. Agatha listened with respect. Her eyes sometimes filled with tears, which she endeavored to wipe away unperceived, but I generally found her countenance and tone more cheerful after having listened to the expirations of her father. It was not thus with Felix. He was always the saddest of the group, and even to my unpraised senses he appeared to have suffered more deeply than his friends. But his countenance was more sorrowful, his voice more cheerful than that of his sister, especially when he addressed the old man. I could mention innumerable instances which, although slight, marked the dispositions of these amiable cottagers. In the midst of poverty and want, Felix carried with pleasure to his sister the first little white flower that peeped out from beneath the snowy ground. Early in the morning, before she had risen, he cleared away the snow that disturbed her path to the milk house, drew water from the well, and brought the wood from the outer house, where, to his perpetual astonishment, he found his store always replenished by the invisible hand in the day. Evidently, he worked sometimes for the neighboring farmer, because he often went forth and did not return until dinner, yet brought no wood with him. At other times he worked in the garden, but there was little to do in the frosty season. He read to the old man and Agatha. This reading had puzzled me extremely at first, but by degrees I discovered that he uttered many of the same sounds which he read as he talked. I conjectured before that he found on paper signs for speech that he understood. I ardently longed to comprehend these also, but how was that possible when I did not even understand the sounds for which they stood as signs? I improved, however, sensibly in this science, but now not sufficiently to follow up any kind of conversation, although I applied my whole mind to the endeavor, for I easily perceived that, although I equally longed to discover myself cottagers, I ought not to make an attempt until I first became master of the language. With knowledge might enable me to look overward the deformity of my figure, for with this also the contrast perfectly presented to my eyes, which made me acquainted. I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, the grace, beauty, and delicate complexions, but how I was terrified that when I viewed myself and shrank was cold. I at first started back, unable to believe what it was indeed. I was reflected in the mirror, and when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensation of despair and mortification. Alas, I did not yet entirely know the fatal affections of this visual deformity. As the sun became warmer, the light a day longer, the snow vanished, and I beheld bare trees in the black earth. From this time, Felix was more employed, and the hard-moving indications of imminent famine disappeared. Their food, as I afterwards found, was coarse, but it was wholesome, and they produced a sufficiency of it. Several new kinds of plants sprang up in the garden, which they dressed, and these signs of comfort increased daily as the season advanced. The old man, leaning on his son, walked each day at noon, when it did not rain. As I found it was called when the heavens poured forth its water. This frequently took place, but a high wind quickly dried the earth, and the season became more pleasant than it had been. My mode of life from my hovel was uniform. During the morning I attended the motions of the cottagers, and when they were dispersed in various occupations I slept. The remainder of the day was spent in observing my friends. When they had retired to rest, if there were any moon or night with starlight, I went into the woods and collected my own food and fuel for the cottage. When I returned, as often as it was necessary, I cleared the path from the snow and performed those offices that I had seen done by Felix. I afterwards found that these labors, performed by an invisible hand, greatly astonished them, and once or twice I heard them, on these occasions, utter the words "good spirit," "wonderful," but I did not understand the signification of these terms. My thoughts now became more active. I longed to discover the motives and feelings of these lovely creatures. I was inquisitive to know why Felix appeared so miserable, and Agatha so sad. I thought, foolish wretch, that it might be power to restore happiness to these deserving people. When I slept or was absent, the forms of the venerable blind father, the gentle Agatha, and the excellent Felix flitted before me. I looked upon them as superior beings, who would be the arbiters of my future destiny. I formed in my imagination 1,000 pictures of presenting myself to them, and their reception of me. I imagined they would be distinguished until my gentle demeanor and calculating words I should first win their favor, afterwards their love. These thoughts exhilarated me, and led me to apply with fresh ardor the fine art of language. My organs were indeed harsh, but supple, and although my voice was very unlike the soft music of their tones, yet I pronounced such words as I understood with tolerable ease. It was as the ass of the lapdog, yet surely gentle as those intentions were affectionate. Although his manners were rude, deserved better treatment than blows and exertion. The pleasant showers and gentle warmth of spring gently altered the aspect of the earth. Men, before this change, seemed to have been hid in their caves, dispersed themselves, and were employed in various arts and cultivation. The birds sang in more cheerful notes, and the leaves began to bud forth on trees. Happy, happy earth, fit habitation for gods, which, so short a time before, was bleak and damp and unwholesome. My spirits were elevated by the enchanting appearance of nature. The past was blotted from my memory. The present was tranquil. The future gilded by bright rays of hope and apparitions of joy. I now hasten to the more moving part of my story. I shall relate events that impressed me with feelings which, from I have been, have made me what I am. Spring advanced rapidly. The weather became fine, and the skies cloudless. It surprised me what before was desert and gloomy should now bloom, with the most beautiful flowers and verdure. My senses were gratified and refreshed by thousands of scents, delight and thousand sights of beauty. It was on one of these days when my cottagers periodically rested from labor. The old man played his guitar, and the children listened to him. that I observed the countenance of Felix was melancholy beyond expression. He sighed frequently, and once his father paused in his music, and I conjectured by his manner that he inquired the cause of his son's sorrow. Felix replied in cheerful accent, and the old man was recommencing his music, when someone tapped at the door. It was a lady on horseback, accompanied by a countryman as a guide. The lady was dressed in a dark suit and covered in a thick black veil. Agatha asked a question, which the stranger only replied by pronouncing, with sweet accent, the name of Felix. Her voice was musical, but unlike that either of my friends. On hearing this word, Felix came hastily to the lady, who, when she saw him, drew up her veil, and I beheld a countenance of angelic beauty and expression. Her hair of a shining black raven, and curiously braided. Her eyes were dark but gentle, although animated, her features of a regular proportion, and her complexion wondrously fair, each cheek tinged with a lovely pink. Felix seemed ravished with delight when he saw her. Every trait of sorrow vanished from his face, and it was instantly expressed in a degree of ecstatic joy, from which I could hardly believe it capable. His eyes sparkled as his cheeks flushed pleasure, and at that moment I thought him as beautiful as a stranger. She appeared affected by different feelings. Wiping a few tears from her lovely eyes, she held out her hand to Felix, who kissed it rapturously and called her, as well as I could distinguish, his sweet Arabian. She did not appear to understand him, but smiled. She assisted her mount, and, dismissing her guide, conducted her into the cottage. Some conversation took place between him and his father. The young stranger knelt at the old man's feet, and would have kissed his hand, but he raised her and embraced her affectionately. I soon perceived that although the stranger uttered articulate sounds and appeared to have a language of her own, she was neither understood by nor herself understood the cottagers. They made many signs which I did not understand and did not comprehend, but I saw her presence diffuse gladness through the cottage, dispelling their sorrow as the sun dissipates the morning mists. Felix seemed particularly happy with smiles of delight and welcome. His Arabian, Agatha, the ever gentle Agatha, kissed the hands of the lovely stranger, and appointing her brother, made signs which appeared to me to mean that he used to be sorrowful until she came. Some hours passed thus, while they, by countenances, expressed joy, the cause of which I did not comprehend. Presently I found by frequent recurrence of some sound which the stranger repeated after them. She was endeavoring to learn their language, and the idea instantly occurred to me that I should make use of the same instructions to the same end. The stranger learned about 20 words at the first lesson. Most of them, indeed, were those which I had before understood, but I profited by the others. As night came on, Agatha and the Aberdeen retired early. When they separated, Felix kissed the hand of the stranger and said, "Good night, sweet Safie." He sat up much longer, conversing with his father by the frequent repetition of her name. I conjectured in their lovely dress as the subject of their conversation. I inherently desired to understand them, and bent every faculty towards that purpose, but found it utterly impossible. Next morning Felix went about his work, and after the usual occupations of Agatha were finished, the Arabian sat at the feet of the old man, and taking his guitar, played some airs so intentionally beautiful that they at once drew tears of sorrow and delight from my eyes. She sang, her voice flowed with rich cadence, swelling or dying away like a nightingale of woods. When she was finished, she gave the guitar to Agatha, who at first declined it. She played a simple air, and her voice accompanied it in sweet accents, but, unlike the wondrous strain of the strangers, the old man endeavored to explain to Sophie, and by which he appeared to wish to express that she bestowed on him the greatest delight of her music. Days now passed as peaceful as before, which the sole alteration of joy had taken place of sadness in the countenances of my friends. Sophie was always gay and happy. She and I improved rapidly in the knowledge of language. so that in 2 months I began to comprehend most of the words uttered by my protectors. In the meanwhile, also, the bank ground was covered with herbage, green banks interspersed with innumerable flowers, sweet to scent and the eyes stars of pale radiance among the moonlight woods. The sun became warmer, the nights clear and balmy, and my nocturnal rambles were an extreme pleasure to me, although they were considerably shortened by the late setting and early rising of the sun, for I never ventured abroad during daylight, fearful of meeting with the same treatment I had formerly endured in the first village which I had entered. My days were spent in close attention, that I might be more speedily mastering the language, and that I might boast that I improved more rapidly than the Arabian, who understood very little and conversed in broken accents, while this I comprehended and could intimate most every word that was spoken. While I improved in speech, I also learned the science of letters as it was taught to the stranger, and this opened before me a wide field of wonder and delight. The books from which Felix instructed Sophie was Wither's Ruins of Empires. I should not have understood the purport of this book had not Felix, in reading it, given every miniature explanations. He had chosen this work, he said, because the declamatory style was framed in imitation of the Eastern authors. Through this work I obtained a curiosity of knowledge of history, and the view of several empires at present existing in the world. It gave me an insight into the manners and governments and religions of different nations of earth. I heard the slaughter aesthetics and the stupendous geniuses and melody of Grecians, and the wars and wonderful virtues of Romans, in their subsequent degradation, and of the decline of that mighty empire of chivalry, courtesy, and kings. I heard the discovery of the American hemisphere that swept with Sophie over the hapless fate of its original inhabitants. These wonderful narrations inspired me with strange feelings. Was man, indeed, at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? He appeared at one time more scorned of the evil principle, and at another, at all, was to be conceived as noble and godlike. To be a great and virtuous man appeared the highest honor which can befall a sensitive being. To be base and vicious, and in many records of men, appeared the lowest degradation. A condition adjacent than that of a blind mole makes, or a harmless worm. For a long time I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. But when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing. Every conversation of the cottagers now opened new wonders to me. While I listened to the instructions which Felix bestowed upon the Arabian, the strange system of human society was explained to me. I heard the terms of human society which is explained to me, and the diversions of property, and immense wealth and squalid poverty, of rank, descent, and noble blood. The words induced me to turn towards myself. I learned that processions most esteemed by your fellow creatures were high and unsullied descent united with riches. A man might be respected with only one of these advantages, but without either he was considered, except in very rare instances, as a vagabond, and a slave doomed to waste his powers for the profits of the chosen few. And what was I? Of my creation and creator I was absolutely ignorant, but I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of property. I was, besides, endued with figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even of the same nature as man. I was more agile and they and could subsist upon coarser diet. I bore the extremities of heat and cold with less injury to my frame. My stature far exceeded theirs. When I looked round, I saw and heard none like me. Was I, then, a monster, a blot upon earth, from which all men fled, whom men disowned. I cannot describe to you the agony that these rejections inflicted upon me. I tried to dispel them, but sorrow only increased with knowledge. Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood, nor known nor felt beyond the sensations of hunger, thirst, and heat. Of what a strange nature is knowledge! It clings to the mind when it is once seized on it, like a lynch on a rock. I wished sometimes to shake off all thought and feeling, but I learned that there was but one means to overcome the sensation of pain, and that death, a state I feared yet did not understand. I admired virtue and good feeling, and loved gentle manners, the animal qualities of my cottagers, but I was shut out from intercourse with them, except through the means which I abstained by stealth. But I was unseen and unknown, and which rather increased than satisfied the desire that I had becoming among one of my fellows. The gentle words of Agatha, the animated smiles of the charming Arabian, were not for me. The mild expectations of the old man and light conversation of the loved Felix were not for me. Miserable and happy wretch! Other lessons were impressed upon me. Even more deeply I heard the difference of sexes. The birth and growth of a child, how father doted on the smiles of the infant and the lively sallies of the older child, how all the life and cares of the mother were wrapped up in the priest's charge, how the mind of youth expanded and gained knowledge of brother, sister, and the virtuous relationships in which bind one human being to another in mutual bonds. But were my friends and relations, no father would watch my infinite days, no mother blessed me with smiles and caresses, or if they had, all my past life was now blot in blind vacancy, in which I distinguished nothing. From my early remembrance, I had met then in height and proportion. I had never seen a being resembling me or claimed any intercourse with me. What was I? The question again reoccurred, to be answered only with groans. I will soon explain these feelings attendant, but allow me to return to the cottagers, whose story excited me in such various feelings of indignation, delight, and wonder, but which all terminated in additional love and reverence for my protectors, for so I loved, in an innocent, half-painful self-deceit, to call them. Chapter 14. Some time elapsed before I learned the history of my friends. It was one which could not fail to impress itself deeply on my mind, unfolding as it did a number of circumstances, each interesting and wonderful to one so utterly inexperienced as I was. The name of the old man was Delancey. He was descended from a good family in France, where he had lived for many years in affluence, respected by his superiors, beloved by his equals. His son was bred in service of his country, and Agatha had ranked with ladies of highest distinction. A few months before my arrival, they had lived in a large, luxurious city called Paris, surrounded by friends and possessed of every enjoyment with virtue, refinement of intellect, or taste, accompanied by modern furniture, could afford. The father of Sophie had been cause of their ruin. He was a Turkish merchant, and inhabited Paris for many years, when, for some reason, which I could not learn, he became obnoxious to the government. He was seized and cast into prison, and every day that Sophie arrived from Castiglione to join him, he was tried and condemned to death. The injustice of his sentence was very flagrant. All Paris was indignant, and it was judged that his religion and wealth rather than the crime alleged against him had been the cause for his condemnation. Felix had accidentally been present at the trial. His horror and indignation were uncontrollable when he heard the decision of the court. He made, at that moment, a sole about to deliver him, and then look around for the means, after many fruitless attempts to gain admittance to the prison. He found a strongly grated window in the unguarded part of the building, which lightened the dungeon of the unfortunate Mahometan, who, loaded with chains, waited in despair for execution. The barbarous sentence. Felix visited the grate at night, and made known to the prisoner's intentions in his favor. The Turk, amazed and delighted, endeavored to kindle the zeal of his deliverer by promises of reward and wealth. Felix rejected his offers with contempt. Yet when he saw lovely Sophie, who allowed to visit her, his father, who, by her gestures, expressed her lively gratitude, the youth could not help owing his mind that captive possessed a treasure which had fully returned his toil and hazard. The Turk quickly perceived the impression that his daughter had made in the heart of Felix, and endeavored to secure him more entirely in his interests, by promise of her hand in marriage, so soon as he would be conveyed to the place of safety. Felix, too dedicated to accept his offer, yet looked away to the probability of this event, consumed with happiness. During the ensuing days, while the preparations were going forward for the escape of the merchant, the zeal of Felix was warmed by several letters that he received from the lovely girl, who found means to express her thoughts in the language of her lover by the aid of an old man, a servant of her father, who understood French. She thanked him in the most ardent terms for his intense services towards her parent. At the same time, she greatly adored her own fate. I have copies of these letters, for I found means during my residence in the hovel to procure the implements of writing. The letters were often in the hands of Felix and Agatha. Before I departed, I will give them to you. They will prove the truth of my tale. At present, as sun is already far declined, I shall only have time to repeat the substance of them to you. Sophie related that her mother was a Christian Arab, seized and made a slave by the Turks, recommended by her beauty. She won the heart of the father of Sophie, who married her. The young girl, in high enthusiasm terms of her mother, who born in freedom spurned the bondage of which she now reduced. She instructed her daughter in the tenets of her religion, and taught her to aspire to higher powers of intellect and independence of spirit forbidden to the female followers of Mohammedan. This lady died, but her lessons were indelibly impressive on the mind of Sophie, who sickened at the prospect of again returning to Asia, and being immured within the walls of a harem, allowed only to occupy herself in infatigable amusements, ill-suited to be the temper of her soul. Now accustomed to grand ideas and noble illumination of virtue, the spark of marrying a Christian, remaining in a country where women were allowed to take a rank in society, enchanting to her. The day for the execution of Turk was fixed, but on the night previous to it, he quitted his prison, and before morning was distant many leagues from Paris. Felix had procured passports, the name of his father, sister, and himself. He had previously communicated his plan to the former, who aided the deceit of quitting his house under the pretense of the journey, concealing himself, and his daughter in an obscure part of Paris. Felix conducted the fugitives from France to Lyons, across Mont Saint-Elias to Leghorn, where the merchant had decided to wait a favorable opportunity of passing into part of Turkish domains. Sophie resolved to remain with her father until the moment of his departure. Before, with time, the Turk renewed his promise, and she would be united to his deliverer. Felix remained with them in the expectation of that event, and in the meantime he enjoyed the society of the Arabian, who exhibited towards him in simplest tenderest affection. They conversed with one another through means of interpreter, and sometimes with the interpretation of looks, and Sophie sang to him the divine airs of her native country. The Turk allowed this intimacy to take place, and encouraged the hopes of the youthful lovers, while his heart he had formed far open plans. He loathed the idea of his daughter should be united to a Christian, but he feared the resentment of Felix if he should appear lukewarm, for he knew he still had the power of his deliverer. If he should choose to betray him to the Italian state which they inhabited, he resolved 1,000 plans which he should be able to prolong the deceit until it be no longer necessary, and secretly to take his daughter with him when he departed. His plans were facilitated by the news which arrived from Paris. The government of France were greatly enraged at the escape of their victim, and spared no pains to detect the punishment of the deliverer. The plot of Felix was quickly discovered, and Delancey and Agatha were thrown into prison. The news reached Felix and roused him from the dream of pleasure. His blinded aged father, his generous sister lay in a noisome dungeon, while he enjoyed the free air and society of whom he loved. This idea was torture to him. He quickly arranged with the Turk that later should be a favorable opportunity for escape before Felix could return to Italy. Sophie should remain as a boarder at the convent of Leghorn, and then, quitting the lovely Arabian, he hastened to Paris and delivered himself to the vengeance of the law, hoping to free Delancey and Agatha by his proceeding. He did not succeed. They remained confined for 5 months before the trial took place, the result of which deprived them of their former accommodation, them to perpetual exile from their native country. They found a miserable asylum in a college in Germany, where I discovered them. Felix soon learned that the treacherous Turk, from whom he and his family endured for such unheard oppression, on discovering that his lover was thus reduced to poverty and ruin, became a traitor to the good feeling and honor that had quitting Italy with his daughter, insultingly sending Felix a pittance of money to aid him, as he said, in some plan of future maintenance. Such were the events that preyed on the heart of Felix and rendered him, when I saw him, the most miserable of his family. He could have endured poverty, while this distress had been mean of his virtue. He gloried in it. But the ingratitude of the Turk and the losses below Sophie were misfortunes, more bitter and irreparable. The arrival of the Arabian now infused new life into his soul. When the news reached Leghorn that Felix was deprived of his wealth and rank, the merchant commanded his daughter to think no more of her lover, but to prepare and return to her native country. The generous nature of Sophie was outraged by this command. She attempted to expostulate with her father, but he left her angrily, rescinding of his tyrannical mandate. A few days later, the Turk entered his daughter's apartment and told her hastily that he had reason to believe that his residence in Leghorn had been divulged, and that he should be speedily delivered up to the French government. He had consequently hired a vessel to convey him to Constantinople, for which city he should sail in a few hours. He intended to leave his daughter under the care of a confidential servant to follow at her leisure with the greater part of his property, which had not arrived at Leghorn. When alone, Sophie resolved in her own mind the plan of conduct that would become her pursue in this emergency. A residence in Turkey was abhorrent to her. Her religion and her feelings were alike averse to it, but some papers of her father which fell into her hands, she heard of the exile of her lover, and learnt the name of the spot where he resided. She hesitated some time, but at length she formed her determination, taking with her some jewels that belonged to her, and a sum of money. She quitted Italy with the attendant, a native of Leghorn, who understood the common language of Turkey, and departed for Germany. She arrived in safety in a town about 20 leagues from the cottage of Delancey, when her attendant fell dangerously ill. Sophie nursed her with the most devoted affection, but the poor girl died, and the Arabian was left alone, unacquainted with the language of the country, and utterly ignorant to the customs of the world. She, however, fell into good hands. The Italian had mentioned the name of the spot for which they were bound, and after her death, the woman of the house in which they had lived to take care of that, Sophie should arrive in safety at the cottage of her lover. Chapter 15. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers. It impressed me deeply. I learned from the views of social life which it depended, to admire the virtues, and to appreciate the vices of mankind. As yet I looked upon the crime as distant evil. Benevolence and generosity were even present before me, enticing within me a desire to become an actor in the busy scene where so many admirable qualities were called forth and displayed. But in giving an account of the progress of my intellect, I must not omit the circumstance in which occurred at the beginning of the month, in August of the same year. One night, during my accustomed visit to the neighborhood, where I collected my own food and home firing for my protectors, I found on the ground a leather portmanteau containing several articles of dress and some books. I eagerly seized the prize and returned it to my hovel. Fortunately, the books were written in language, elements of which I had acquired at college. They consisted of Paradise Lost, a volume of Petrarch's Lies, The Sorrows of Returner. The possession of these treasures gave me extreme delight. I now continually studied and exercised my mind upon these histories, whilst my friends were employed in their ordinary occupations. I can hardly describe to you the effects of these books. They produced in me infinitely new images and feelings. They sometimes raised me to ecstasy, but sometimes frequently sunk me into the lowest dejection. In The Sorrows of Returner, besides the interest of its simple and affecting story, so many opinions are canvassed and so many lights thrown upon a hitherto been to me obscure subjects, that I found a never-ending source of speculation and astonishment. The gentle and diplomatic manners described, combined with lofty sentiments and feelings, which had for their object something out of myself, according well with my experience among my protectors, with some of the ones were forever alive in my own bosom. But I want Returner himself a more divine being than I had ever beheld or imagined. His character contained no pretension, but it sunk deep. The disquisitions upon death and suicide were calculated to fill me with wonder. I did not pretend to enter into the merits of the case, yet I inclined towards the opinions of the hero, whose extinction I wept, without precisely understanding it. As I read, however, I applied much personally to my own feelings and condition. I found myself similar, yet at the same time strangely unlike, to the beings considering who I read and those conviction I was a listener. I was sympathized with and partly understood them, but I was unformed in mind. I was dependent on none and related to none. The path of my departure was free, and there was none to limit my annihilation. My person was hideous and my stature gigantic. My person was... Who was I? What was I? What did this mean? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. The volume of Petrarch's Lives which I possessed contained the histories of the first founders of the ancient republics. This book had far different effect upon me from The Sorrows of Returner. I learned from Returner's imaginations diplomacy and gloom, but Petrarch taught me high thoughts. He elevated me beyond the wretched sphere of my own reflections, to admire and to love the heroes of past ages. Many things I read surpassed my understanding and experience. I had a very confused knowledge of kingdoms, wide extents of country, mighty rivers, and boundless seas, but I perfectly unacquainted with towns, large assemblies of men, and the cottage of my own protectors. Had been only school which I had studied human nature, but this book developed new and mightier scenes of action. I read of men concerned with public affairs, governing or massacring their species. I felt the great ardor for virtue rise within me, the hordes for vice, as far as I understood the significance of those terms, relative to as they were, as I applied them to pleasure and pain alone, introduced by these feelings. I was, of course, led to admire peaceable lawgivers, Numa, Sloan, and Lycurgus, in preference to Romus and Thulius. The partial lives of my protectors caused these impressions to take a firm hold on my mind. Perhaps if my first introduction to humanity had been made by a younger soldier, burning for glory and slaughter, I should have been imbued in different sensations, but Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it as I read the other volumes, which have fallen into my hands as a true history. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an ultimate god warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often returned to several situations, as their similarity struck me to my own. Unlike Adam, I was apparently united with no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine. In every other respect, he had come forth from lands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the bitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, I viewed the bliss of my protectors, a bitter gall of envy rose within me. Other circumstances strengthened and confirmed these feelings. Soon after my arrival in the hovel, I discovered some papers in the pocket of a dress which I had taken from your laboratory. At first, I neglected them, but now I was able to decipher the characters in which they were written. I began to study them with diligence. It was your journal of the 4 months that preceded my creation. You minutely described in these papers every step you took in the progress of your work. This history is mingled with accounts of domestic occurrences. You doubtless recollect these papers. Here they are. Everything is related in them, which bears reference to my accursed origin. The whole detail, then which series of disgusting circumstances which produced a set view. The minutest description of my odious and loathsome person is given, in language which painted your own horrors and rendered mine indelible. I sickened as read, hate day that I received life. I exclaimed in agony, accursed Creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, if pity, made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but why my form is filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the every resemblance. Satan had his companion fellow devils to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. These were reflections of my hours, despondency and solitude, but when I contemplated the virtues of cottagers, their animal and benevolent dispositions, I pursued myself when they should have become acquainted with my admiration of their virtues. They would compassionate me and overlook my personal deformity. They can term their door one who were monstrous, so socially in their compassion. The friendship I resolved, at least, not to despair, but in every way to fit myself for an interview with them, which would decide my fate. I postponed this attempt for some months longer, for the importance attached to its success inspired me with the dread lest I should fail. Besides, I found in my understanding it proved so much with every day's experience. I was unwilling to commence this undertaking until a few months should I have added to my sagacity. Several changes in the meantime took place. In the cottage, the presence of Sophie diffused happiness among its inhabitants, and I also found that a great degree of plenty reigned there. Felix and Agatha spent more time in amusement and conversation, and were assisted in their labors by servants. They did not appear rich, but they were content and happy. Their feelings were sincere and peaceful, while mine became every day more tumultuous. Increase of knowledge only discovered to me more clearly that a rich outcast I was. I cherished hope, it was true, but it vanquished when I beheld my person reflected in water, or my shadow in the moonshine. Even as that frail image of the incandescent shade, I endeavored to crush these fears and to fortify myself for a trial, which in a few months I resolved to undergo. And sometimes I allowed my thoughts, unchecked by reason, to ramble in fields of paradise, and there to fancy animal and lovely creatures sympathizing with my feelings and cherishing my gloom. Their angelic countenances bring smiles of consolation. It was all a dream. No Eve soothed my sorrows, nor shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's supplication to his Creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and in bitterness of my heart I cursed him. Autumn passed thus. I saw with surprise and grief the leaves decay and fall. Nature again assumed the barren, bleak appearance it had worn when I first beheld the woods and the lovely moon. Yet I did not heed the bleakness of the weather. I was better fitted by my confirmation for the endurance of cold than heat. My chief delights were the sight of flowers, the birds, and all the gay apparel of summer. When those deserted me, I turned more attention towards the cottagers. Their happiness was not decreased by absence of summer. They loved and sympathized with one another, and their joys, depending on each other, were not interrupted by the casualties that took place around them. The more I saw of them, the greater became my desire to claim their protection and kindness. My heart yearned to be known and loved by these animal creatures. They seemed their sweet looks direct towards me in affection was almost limit to my abomination. I dare not think they would turn from me with disdain and horror. The poor had stopped at their door and were never driven away. I asked, it was true, for greater treasures than food or rest. I required kindness and sympathy, but I did not believe myself unworthy of it. The winter advanced, and the entire revolution of seasons had taken place. I awoke into life. My attention at this time was solely directed towards my plan of introducing myself into the cottage of my protectors. I resolved many projects, but now on I finally fixed the center of the dwelling when the blind man should be alone. I had sagacity enough to discover the unnatural hiddenness of my person was the chief object of horror which those who had formerly beheld me. My voice, although harsh, had nothing terrible in it. I thought, therefore, that in the absence of his children I could gain the good will and meditation of old Delancey. I might by his means be tolerated by the younger protectors. One day, when the sun shone and the red leaves that strewed upon the ground had diffused cheerfulness, although it denied warmth, Sophie, Agatha, and Felix departed on the long country walk. The old man, at his own desire, was left alone in the cottage. When his children had departed, he took up his guitar and played several mournful but sweet airs. More sweet and mournful than I could ever heard him play before. At the first time, his countenance was illuminated with pleasure. But he formed thoughtfulness, and sadness succeeded. At length, lying aside the instrument, he sat absorbed in reflection. My heart beat quickened. This was the hour moment of trial, which would decide my hopes and realize my fears. The servants were gone to the neighboring fair. All was silent in and around the cottage. It was an excellent opportunity, yet when I proceeded to execute my plans, my limbs failed me. I sank to the ground. Again I rose, exerting all the firmness of which I was master, removed the planks which I had placed before my hovel to conceal my retreat. The fresh air revived me. With renewed determination, I approached the door of the cottage. I knocked. "Who is there?" said the old man. "Come in." I entered. "Pardon this institution," said I. "I am a traveler, in want of a little rest. You could greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." "Enter," said Delancey. "I will try in what manner I can to relieve your wants. But, unfortunately, my children are from home, and as I am blind, I am afraid I shall not find it difficult to procure food for you. Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. It is warmth and rest only that I need." I sat down, and silence ensued. I knew every minute was precious to me, yet I remained irresolute. In the manner commenced in the interview, the man addressed me. "By your language, stranger, I suppose you are a countryman. Are you French?" "No, but I was educated by a French family, and understood that language only. I am now going to claim the protection of some friends, whom I sincerely love, in whose favor I have some hopes." "Are they Germans?" "No, they are French. But let us change subject. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around, and I have no relation or friend upon earth. These animal people whom I have never seen me, know little of me. I am full of fears, for I fail there. I am an outcast in a world forever. Do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any oblivious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely there on your hopes, and if these friends are good and animal, do not despair. They are kind, they are most excellent creatures in the world, but, fortunately, they prejudge against me. I have good dispositions. My life has been hitherto harmless, and in some degree beneficial, but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes, and where they ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster. It is indeed unfortunate, but if you are really blameless, can you not undeceive them? I am about to undertake that task, but it is on that account I feel so many overwhelming terrors. I tenderly love these friends. I have unknown to them, I have been for many months in the habits of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice which I wish to overcome. Where do these friends reside? Near this spot. The old man paused and then continued. If you will unreservedly confide to me the particulars of your tale, I perhaps may be used to undeceiving them. I am blind and cannot judge your countenance, but there is your something in your words that persuades me that you are sincere. I am poor and exile, but it will afford me true pleasure to be in the way of service to a human creature. Excellent man, I thank you and accept your generous offer. You raised me from the dust by this kindness, and I trust you. By your aid, I shall not be driven from the society and sympathy of your fellow creatures. Heaven forbid. Even if you really are criminal, for that you only drive to desperation, it cannot instruct you to virtue. I am also am unfortunate. I and my family have been condemned, although innocent judge. Therefore, I do not feel your misfortunes. How do I thank you, my best and only benefactor? From your lips first I have heard the voice of kindness directed toward me. I shall be forever grateful, and your present humanity assures me of success, and those friends whom I may appoint a meeting. May I know the names and residence of those friends? I paused. This, I thought, at the moment of decision, which was to rob me or bestow happiness upon me. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sank in the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment I heard steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seized the hand of the old man and cried, Now is the time. Save the protector me. You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Do not you desert me in an hour, child. Great God, explained the man. Who are you? At that instant the door opened, and Felix, Sophie, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Sophie, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix started forward with supernatural force, tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, but the lion rends the antelope. But my heart sank within me as bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blow, then overcame my pain and anguish. I quitted the cottage, and in great tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel.